Do you remember the sound of a dial-up modem? That screeching robotic symphony that meant you were about to enter the internet, but only if no one in your house picked up the phone? Or maybe you remember something even older, the weight of a VHS tape in your hand, the smell of a freshly opened CD case, the way you memorized your best friend's phone number because you had to. And yet, you also learned how to build a MySpace page. You adapted to Facebook before your parents even understood what it was. You text, you stream, you Zoom, you swipe. If you relate to all of that, you might be part of a small, often overlooked group, Xennials, the in-between generation. Not quite Gen X, not quite millennial, a psychological bridge between two very different worlds. But here's the interesting part. Being in between isn't just a cultural label. It shapes your brain, your stress patterns, your relationships, even your sense of identity in ways most people never stop to examine. Let me show you why. Imagine growing up in a world where boredom was physical. You felt it in your body, you stared at the ceiling, you wandered outside, you knocked on a friend's door without texting first. There was friction between you and information, between you and entertainment, between you and other people. That friction mattered. Psychologists often talk about delayed gratification, the ability to wait for rewards. The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment showed that kids who could delay gratification tended to have better long-term outcomes. Now think about the environment you were shaped by if you're a Xennial. Waiting wasn't optional, it was structural. You waited for photos to be developed. You waited for your favorite song to come on the radio. You waited for someone to call back. Your nervous system was trained in patience. But then, sometime in adolescence or early adulthood, the world flipped. Suddenly everything was instant. Information, connection, entertainment, validation, and your brain had to rewire itself mid-development. That's a very specific psychological experience. Neuroscience tells us that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and emotional regulation, continues developing into your mid-20s. For Xennials, the digital explosion happened right during that window. You weren't born into instant gratification. You transitioned into it. So your brain carries two operating systems. One part of you understands scarcity, waiting, and offline intimacy. Another part adapted to speed, multitasking, and constant connectivity. That dual wiring can feel like tension, but it's also a rare strength. Have you ever noticed how you can feel nostalgic and hypermodern at the same time? You can appreciate handwritten letters, but you also manage 5 group chats effortlessly. You know how to survive without Google, yet you rely on it daily. That cognitive flexibility isn't random. It's the result of developmental timing. There's also something deeper happening beneath the surface: identity formation. Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist, described adolescence and early adulthood as critical stages for identity building. Who am I? Becomes the central question. For many millennials, identity formation happened online from the beginning. For Gen X, it happened almost entirely offline. But for Xennials, identity formed in both spaces. You had a real-world childhood, scraped knees, paper maps, face-to-face arguments. But your teenage or young adult self began curating an online persona. You remember life before social media comparison, and you also experienced its rise. That split can create a strange internal dialogue. Part of you values privacy deeply. You're wary of oversharing. You remember when diaries had locks, not followers, and yet another part of you understands personal branding, digital presence, the subtle pressure to be visible. It's like growing up bilingual, but the two languages are offline humanity and digital identity. And being bilingual shapes cognition. Studies on bilingual individuals show enhanced cognitive flexibility and perspective taking. In a metaphorical sense, Xennials are culturally bilingual. You can translate between generations. You can explain TikTok to your older siblings and explain cassette tapes to younger coworkers. That bridging role can feel exhausting sometimes. You're often the mediator at work, the one who understands why older colleagues resist change and why younger colleagues expect it instantly. You live in the middle, and living in the middle often means carrying invisible tension. There's also the economic psychology. Many Xennials entered adulthood around the time of the early 2000s tech boom and then the 2008 financial crisis. You were told to follow passion, get degrees, believe in upward mobility. Then the ground shifted, job markets tightened, stability felt fragile. That combination creates a very specific mindset, cautious optimism. You're ambitious, but skeptical. You believe in growth, but you've seen systems fail. Research in behavioral economics shows that people who experience economic instability during formative years often develop heightened risk awareness. Not necessarily risk aversion, but risk calculation. You may notice it in how you approach money. You save, but you also invest. You hustle, but you remember layoffs. You want freedom, but you crave security. And then there's technology and relationships. You learned how to date before dating apps. You remember calling someone's house and nervously asking for them while their parent listened. You felt rejection in real time, face to face. But you also adapted to texting, swiping, algorithmic matchmaking. Your attachment patterns were shaped in analog, then tested in digital. Psychologists studying attachment theory have found that constant digital availability can amplify anxiety in relationships. The "why haven't they replied" spiral. But Xennials often carry an internal memory of a slower communication. You know that silence doesn't always mean rejection. You've lived in gaps before. That can make you more resilient. But it can also create restlessness, because part of you knows how to sit in quiet, and another part is now wired for stimulation. Have you ever caught yourself scrolling late at night and suddenly feeling tired in a deeper way? Not just physically tired, existentially tired. Like your brain misses something slower, softer, less optimized. That's not weakness, it's contrast. You've experienced two eras of attention, before algorithms and after algorithms, before curated feeds and after them. And your nervous system can sense the difference. There is research showing that people who remember pre-digital childhood often report a stronger episodic memory recall, vivid sensory memories anchored in physical experiences, climbing trees, riding bikes until dark, waiting in line at a video rental store. Those embodied memories create a grounded baseline. They remind you that life can exist outside the screen. And here's the reframe. Being in between isn't being lost. It's being a hinge. A hinge connects two rooms. It allows movement. It carries weight quietly. Xennials often underestimate this about themselves. They think they're behind younger generations in tech fluency or less rebellious than Gen X. But psychologically, you may be one of the most adaptable cohorts alive. Adaptation is not loud. It doesn't trend. It's subtle. It's the ability to integrate change without losing core identity. You remember a world that required patience. You adapted to one that rewards speed. You formed identity offline and then renegotiated it online. You experienced economic promise and economic instability. You learned independence before constant connectivity. That layered experience builds complexity, and complexity, psychologically, is resilience. It means you can hold two truths at once. You can value tradition and innovation. You can crave stability and adventure. You can feel nostalgic and progressive. The tension you sometimes feel, that sense of not fully belonging to either generation, might actually be evidence of expanded perspective. Think about it this way. If generations are shaped by shared stories, you carry two origin myths, the analog childhood and the digital awakening. That dual narrative gives you narrative flexibility, the ability to reinterpret your own life story as the world changes. And in psychology, narrative flexibility is powerful. It's associated with greater emotional regulation and life satisfaction because you're less rigid in how you define yourself. So maybe the next time you feel in between, instead of asking, why don't I fully fit? You could ask, what do I uniquely understand because I don't fully fit? You understand transition. You understand that worlds can change quickly, that systems can collapse and rebuild, that technology can transform daily life in less than a decade, and that awareness might be one of the most valuable psychological tools for the future, because we're not done changing. If anything, the pace is accelerating. Artificial intelligence, remote work, shifting economies. The next generations will face transformations just as dramatic. And who will help translate between what was and what's next? Often, the hinge generation. So if you're a Xennial listening to this, maybe the goal isn't to pick a side, not to argue whether you're more Gen X or more millennial. Maybe it's to recognize that your brain was trained in adaptation, your identity forged in contrast, your resilience built in transition. And if you're not a Xennial, maybe you now understand someone in your life a little better. The friend who still loves mixtapes but also runs a remote team. The colleague who questions trends but masters them anyway. We all belong to a moment in history, but some people belong to two. If this resonated with you, I'd love to know, do you feel that in-between tension? Or that in-between is strength? Let me know in the comments what parts of your childhood still shape how you see the digital world today. And if you enjoy exploring the psychology behind who we are and why we feel the way we do, consider subscribing. Because the more we understand the forces that shaped us, the more intentionally we can shape what comes next.